All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming. We're a little bit of a smaller crew today, but hopefully more of us will be able to listen to the recording and be able to give some feedback on our conversation around our general education outcomes revision. So thank you all for being a part of this process. Just to give you a little bit of an update, we're going to start talking a little bit about where we are in the update for our work this semester, and then we're going to dive into conversation about our general education outcomes revision. So just to kind of communicate, we've used this image in the past, but these are the key pieces that we need to be successful in the work around assessment. And so talking about our vision, the skills, and some of the other pieces that we've put in place to get us there. And just to highlight again, our vision for this work is to develop and implement a systematic, sustainable structure for student learning outcomes assessment, both at the program level and at the general education outcomes level. So that's our vision for this work. We're going to tie in kind of our conversation today, how that ties into our larger vision. So the progress today, to give you an update of where we are in this process, we've had these two phases for our project plan prior to our focus visit, our HLC focus visit in April of 2020. So this first phase that we're currently in right now is really focusing on the processes, the mapping, and the structure around assessment of student learning. So this academic year, we've really been focused on building the foundation for both our program and our general education outcomes assessment. And really next year, next academic year, I should say, starting with fall 2019, we're really going to be focused on both implementing, assessing, and also allocating resources as a result of our assessment efforts. So just to kind of contextualize us with where we are in our project plan, this semester we have been focused on developing or revising, depending on the area of the institution, program outcomes. And so we've really been doing a lot of work, especially in the last week or so, around either developing program outcomes for our programs here at Triton, or for those programs who had existing outcomes, doing some work around revising, making sure that we're all on the same page and we all have the same knowledge around developing program outcomes. So that's been our work, particularly in the last few weeks. And so now we're really kicking off some of our institution-wide conversations about revising our general education outcomes. Where next semester we're going to be focusing on some additional work in terms of creating assessment maps and looking to revise our assessment cycle. And really in the work of both these semesters for this academic year, what we're doing with a lot of this professional development and conversation around assessment is creating a common assessment terminology and talking about assessment in similar ways. Which in the past has been noted or has been noted by HLC that as an institution, we don't necessarily share the same vocabulary. So we've been really focusing on that and, of course, communicating our efforts, communicating the work that's being done to stakeholders across the institution. So this semester, this has been our professional development calendar. And so these forums, the ones that are kind of in the light purple, have been open to all stakeholders at the institution. And this has really been a venue to communicate information and to hold conversation, discussions around some of the efforts like today and kind of towards the next half of this conversation talking about our general education outcomes. The trainings that we held two earlier in the semester, one in September and one in October. These trainings have been open to all, and then really what we've been focusing on these trainings is this kind of foundational information for the work that we're completing this semester. And then last week we had our first workshop. And so these workshops have been open to the program assessment plan developers, those individuals, those faculty members who are developing program level outcomes. And we had our first one last Friday, and this was an opportunity for people to really dive in and do some work on their outcomes. And so now we are kicking off again. The star right there is the first of our faculty open forums on our general education outcomes. So this is kind of kicking off that conversation where we'll be sharing information on that revision process, and then we'll have multiple other opportunities coming up to continue that conversation as well, and have as many people from across the college involved in that conversation as possible. And so this next workshop that's coming up, along with the conversation with general education outcomes, we will be continuing conversations around our program level outcomes and mapping. So there's a lot of moving pieces right now, but hopefully with our documentation and also communicating this in a variety of ways, we're kind of keeping people in the loop of the multiple layers of work that are going on this semester. So to kick off our conversation today, if you did not get a copy of the AAC&U rubrics, there's a pile of them over there. And Beth or Christopher, would you go to pass some of them out? I know Keith got one. Great. And if anyone else wants to reference them, I know Kevin and Shelley have probably seen them multiple times. You can kind of reference them during our conversation today. Thank you. And then I'll also be posting these along with the recording. So those individuals, those folks who are watching this as a recorded session, you'll be able to reference that handout as well. So when we kick off our conversation about our general education outcomes, kind of the purpose and the vision of this work is, one, to align ourselves with a nationally recognized tool. And this is going to help us, again, create that common assessment language and a common shared understanding across the institution of our general education outcomes. So the AAC&U rubric is the tool that we've chosen to align ourselves with. And this was a recommendation that came out of work by the assessment committee last semester. So we had someone from AAC&U come in and speak to us over assessment day, and then we also had groups of faculty, staff, and administration that took a look at our current general education outcomes and the AAC&U rubrics. And we're able to kind of start conversations about aligning these, aligning our general education outcomes with these rubrics. And so this was a recommendation that came out of the assessment committee last spring to move in this direction. And some of the benefits of this rubric. So the Association of American Colleges and University rubrics, these were developed by teams of faculty experts from colleges and universities across the United States. These rubrics articulate fundamental criteria for each learning outcome with performance descriptors. So it's basically building on this idea of having an outcome, but then actually having a tool that articulates subcomponents of that outcome, and then also with performance descriptors. So if you're taking a look at the rubrics in front of you, they're formatted very similarly, and on the left-hand side, it breaks down, for example, the top copy is the critical thinking rubric. So it breaks down the concept of critical thinking into some subcomponents, and then also gives descriptions of performance ranging from benchmark, which is a 1 all the way on the right, through capstone, which is a 4 on the left. And gives a description of students' behaviors or knowledge or skills that would fit the different performance levels. And so this really allows the institution, so Triton, to talk about these general education outcomes at an institutional level, and they are used for evaluating and discussing student learning. And these rubrics allow evidence of student learning in these general education outcomes to be shared through a common dialogue and understanding of what it means for a student to be successful in meeting these general education outcomes. So our current general education outcomes, I'm not going to read these directly, but we currently have 9 general education outcomes. And so our current education outcomes state that upon completing his or her course of study at Triton, a student will have, and I'm going to read off the abbreviated versions, but demonstrated critical thinking, practiced analytic inquiry, learned information literacy, practiced quantitative reasoning, demonstrated communication fluency, and practiced technological fluency, engaged diverse perspectives and civic issues, encountered sustainable practices, and acquired and applied knowledge specific to a field of study. And we look at our general education outcomes, a conversation that came out of the assessment committee's discussion, and then also our larger discussion with the campus community and assessment day, was first, not all of our general education outcomes are aligned with kind of the this national standard, right? So AAC&U has 16 rubrics that have been pulled from institutions across the nation, and not all of us, our outcomes align to one of those that are kind of nationally recognized. Also, we haven't had some concerns about individuals, folks on campus being able to articulate what our general education outcomes were, right? We have 9 of them, so the need to kind of pare that down and effectively assess those in a specific time frame. And then also the idea that having a general education outcome, for example, like critical thinking, but not having it tied to a specific tool really lends itself to being subjectively interpreted across disciplines or across areas. And so not necessarily having a tool where we can share language and share understanding across the institution. So aligning our general education outcomes with the AAC&U value rubrics allows us to do that, right? We talked about revising them, paring them down so we can assess them in a manageable way, and then also tying them to a tool like the rubric where we can have a shared understanding across the institution. So our proposed general education outcomes revision has come from conversations with the assessment committee, and we have revised that list of 9 down to 5. And again, that came out of recommendations from assessment day and then continued conversations with the assessment committee. And so the 5 that we are proposing are critical thinking, communication, information literacy, quantitative literacy, which we've had in different forms previously, and then also global learning, which has been kind of adapted some of our current general education outcomes and has kind of truly made that a general education outcome, one that can apply to all areas across the institution. And I've listed underneath these the value rubrics to which they are aligned. So for example, critical thinking has a critical thinking value rubric. Communication, there's actually 2 rubrics that are incorporated in that outcome, and that would be both written and oral. Currently, our general education outcome only applies to written communication. Information literacy, quantitative literacy are both tied to value rubrics. And then global learning has a value rubric, and then it also incorporates 3 other rubrics to use to evaluate student learning as well. Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
The global learning, I think it makes more sense to put global learning value rubric on top.
Yes.
And then the other 3 will be indented.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that will make more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're going to type up a proposal with all of the outcome language, and when we do that, we'll reflect that in. Absolutely. So, does anyone have any questions or comments before we move on to the kind of articulating these general education outcomes? All right, we'll go ahead. So, for critical thinking, the outcome, and you can take a look at the value rubric again that's on top, and it's really reflecting, kind of we're adapting our current general education outcomes to reflect the language that is in the AAC&U's value rubric. So as a result of going through their course of education here at Triton, students will be able to explore issues, ideas, artifacts, and events before accepting or formulating an opinion or conclusion. And we're sharing these to receive feedback, to hear insight, but we really are looking to align it with the AAC value rubric. So we're pulling language from the rubric and from its definitions and descriptions. But we are absolutely want to hear feedback, hear ideas on kind of these draft outcomes. So that is our critical thinking. I'm going to go through all of them, and maybe we can open it up to have a little bit of a conversation on those. So communication. So again, this incorporates both written and oral. And students will be able to develop and express ideas in written or oral form. That would be our communication outcome. The third one, for information literacy, students will be able to identify, locate, evaluate, and effectively and responsibly use and share information. Outcome for information literacy. Quantitative literacy, students will be able to analyze and solve quantitative problems from a wide array of contexts. And then finally, that last outcome for global learning. Students will be able to analyze and explore complex global challenges from diverse perspectives. And each of these outcomes has a rubric associated with, so when we go to assess a general education outcome, for example, like global learning, you can use the rubric that is aligned with that outcome. But specifically with the global learning rubric, there is a rubric, if you flip kind of towards the back, that is specifically global learning. So faculty would have the opportunity to choose that rubric, but there are also 3 other rubrics that the AAC&U recognizes that align very closely with the global learning rubric. So, for example, if the student artifacts and student learning in your classroom better aligns with, for example, the intercultural knowledge and competence value rubric, you'll be able to use that to assess the student artifact. The next one that is also very closely related underneath global learning is ethical reasoning, and then also civic engagement. So you would be able to use the global learning rubric to assess that outcome, but you could also use one of the other 3 rubrics if that more closely aligns with the content or the student learning that is occurring in your classroom. Do you have any questions or comments about these 5 draft revised general education outcomes? Can you get some feedback or some comments? Yes.
So, in the interest of facilitating conversation,
Yeah.
So then the objective here is that not only a general education core course will be utilizing these general education outcome rubrics, but also that they are global or general enough that they can align with curriculum from across the campus. Am I correct in making this?
Yes. So we would assess these in our general education core, right? But they should be general enough that courses across the institution, that learning would be reflected in the general education outcomes, which is why we're reducing it to 5 and then making them a little bit more general to reflect that.
So, Chris, if you think about our general outcome and then think about the IAI GECC, General Education Core Curriculum, you can see both sets mirror quite nicely. So that form another checkpoint for us.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up the IAI. That's great. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, great.
The last one, global learning.
Yes.
We map that to course outcomes. You said, depending on the course, the faculty can select one of those 4 global learning or the other 3. So the mapping would be to global learning or the individual?
Yes, would be to global learning. Yes, that is the general education outcome. And if you take a look at the rubrics, if you get a little bit more detailed, the global, the 3 other, the intercultural, the ethical reasoning, and the civic engagement, all 3 of those concepts are represented in the global learning rubric. So it would basically, these are kind of sub-constructs underneath global learning, and so they would be able to use those rubrics to expand on a specific part of global learning if they wish to in their class, if that better represented the student learning that was occurring there. So yeah, global learning and the global learning rubric is the general education outcome, but using kind of the subcomponents if that's more appropriate, and really allowing faculty to make those choices. Because there's a lot of complexity there.
Can I try to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure.
So the whole thinking is the following, if I understand from the conversation yesterday. Global learning itself is a big construct, so we want to be able to allow the faculty to pick and choose. So when you think about global learning, subsume that with three constructs, which is ethical reasoning, intercultural competency, and also civic engagement. So my theoretical argument is following. When you have ethical reasoning, which is the intrapersonal moral standard, right? One can have a moral standard but do not engage civically or have the intercultural knowledge. So my argument that just because the three represent different constructs, intercultural, which is knowledge acquisitions, right? Civic engagement is all about action. So to me, to be able to develop a global citizen, then that person ought to be able to have the intrapersonal moral standard, the intercultural knowledge, and then be able to act on it, civically engage, right? So if you look at these three constructs, representing three very different levels of actions or knowledge, then the faculty can really choose from the four. If that course is really cover the knowledge, actions, and also intra-moral standard, then let's use the global learning rubric. But if a course, for example, medical terminology, focus on medical ethics, then maybe interpersonal moral standard, more valuable. Then the healthcare course can pick that subconstruct. So the whole design here is we want to be able to offer flexibility and autonomy for faculty to choose one of those based on course content and discipline. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thanks for elaborating, Kevin. Any other questions and comments on the outcomes as they're written currently? We're gonna have, I'm gonna talk about this in a moment. We'll have additional opportunities. I know it's a lot of content to kind of take in. So we'll be sharing out these rubrics, sharing out in kind of written format a proposal of the revised general education outcomes, and send those out for people to discuss, right? Look over the rubrics, take a look a little bit, take a little bit of a deeper dive into the materials. It's the first time we're sharing all of that together. And so giving individuals an opportunity to kind of mull it over, to dig a little bit deeper, and then we'll have two additional conversations in this kind of open forum format. And so the two other forums that will be held to discuss this topic are going to be on Tuesday, October 30th, and also Tuesday, November 6th. So this conversation will be recorded. Individuals can provide written feedback to me. Also attendance at the additional two open forums. And then there's also going to be a conversation and a vote at Academic Senate on November 13th. So the idea is that we're going to kind of share, incorporate some feedback, and have a final proposal that will go to Academic Senate on Tuesday, November 13th, and they'll be voted on at that day as a proposal recommendation and move forward to Vice President Baker. Are there any questions on kind of the process or the procedure moving forward? All right. Great. So the next open forum, to kind of, like I said, to give you a chance to absorb this information and come back with some comments and some feedback. The next open forum will be on Tuesday, October 30th. And all the rubrics, you have a paper copy, but electronic copy can be found at aacu.org/value rubrics, or if you just type into Google AAC&U value rubrics, you'll be able to pull them up. And please take a look at the rubrics. You, like I said, you have a paper copy. Look at the 16 rubrics that are available online, but focusing on the ones that I shared today. And if you have any questions, if you have any comments or feedback, You can email me as the assessment chair. There's my email addresses up there. Also, Christopher Plum is serving as our faculty assessment specialist. So you can contact one of us, provide your feedback. We'll ensure that that is incorporated in the next discussions and conversations that we have around the general education outcomes. So for those of you who are not here with us today but are listening to this recording, send us an email with some of your feedback before the next open forum, and we'll ensure that that is brought up in that conversation. All right, any last questions or comments?
Yeah, how are you going to share the revised definitions?
Like after we incorporate some feedback?
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll incorporate feedback. I think we'll probably share them at the next forum, depending on when we're receiving feedback. But then, like this one, I'll share out. I'll try to see if we can get an all faculty email or send it somewhere through the CTE. We'll find a venue to share that out. I'll send this out, and then after the next forum, as we've incorporated feedback, I'll send it out again. Mm-hmm. Good question, as I'm looking at each other. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. It's exciting to have a chance to revise our data outcomes and to make them a little bit more relevant to the current work that we're doing here at the institution. So I appreciate any comments, any feedback that you have. Please reach out to me, reach out to Christopher, stop us in the hallway. We'd love to chat. So thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.